Welcome to the April edition of the East Ward Update. I'm Derwin Montgomery, council member of the East Ward. On this month's show, I'll be speaking with the director of the city's Human Relations Department, Wanda Allen Abraha. Wanda, happy to have you on today to talk a little bit about what you do here at the city. And first, would you just let us know who you are and what you do?
Yes, as you've stated, I'm Wanda Allen Abraha. I'm the director of the Human Relations Department. What we do is we enforce the city's fair housing laws, we mediate landlord-tenant complaints, and we also conduct cultural outreach and education on behalf of the city of Winston-Salem. So just to elaborate a bit on those three areas, with fair housing, it is our charge as a HUD partner for the city of Winston-Salem to enforce all laws, rules, and regulations that pertain to housing discrimination in the rental, sale, or financing of housing for any person. And so to that end, we investigate fair housing complaints. We make a determination as to whether or not there is cause to believe, reasonable cause to believe, that discrimination has occurred. And then if we find that discrimination has occurred, then that particular case is forwarded on to our city attorney's office for litigation. For the landlord-tenant area, we accept mediation complaints, or mediation, I should say, requests from landlords and tenants alike. And so if there's a landlord who's having an issue with a tenant, or if there's a tenant having an issue with the landlord, or if they're just needing to just sit down and talk and they need a neutral party to help them to facilitate talks, that is what we do.
Give me an example in terms of the landlord-tenant. No, say in terms of some conflict that may exist, but just give an example of some of the things that may come up that would cause either the tenant or the landlord to request for your services in your office.
Oftentimes, we receive complaints based on security deposits. I would say that's probably the most frequent complaint that we hear, is tenants really not understanding under what circumstances they should be receiving their security deposit refund checks. Oftentimes, tenants will feel as though they are deserving of a security deposit refund despite how the unit may be left. And so we typically will explain to them that the residence or the unit has to be left in the same or very similar condition as it was when they initially started their lease period. And then with the landlord, sometimes landlords don't understand that unless they have some of the damages documented for the unit, then they have to return that security deposit in whole. And so we just try to encourage people to document any damages, to make sure that even before the rental unit is leased out, they take pictures, make sure they take pictures to document the condition, and then document once again when they move out. And there are also move-in forms that have checklists on them where they can check whether something is damaged slightly or whether it's majorly damaged and so forth. And then adversely, there's also a move-out form where you can compare it against the move-in form. So there are different things that can be done to kind of help to validate what one party may be saying versus the other when that time arises. Another popular thing that we get, another popular issue would be things pertaining to parking spaces, people not understanding whether or not they're entitled to a particular parking space because of where the unit is located, and just things like that. And sometimes, I guess, when you have two people who are so on opposite ends of the issue, it's hard to sit down and have a meeting of the mind, so to speak. And so again, we come in as a neutral party. Of course, our services are free, and we sit down with the parties, either sometimes even over the telephone, and just help them to compromise, to come to something that is acceptable and amenable to both the landlord and the tenant.
So how many tenants or landlords do you all see probably within a year that you all get to come through and actually take advantage of the opportunity for mediation?
Well, we have 2 mediators on staff, and I would say on average the number of landlord-tenant mediations we have would be somewhere between 75 to 100 depending on the year. And the average landlord-tenant complaint takes approximately 30 days to mediate. Sometimes it can be mediated in 24 hours or less. But sometimes it's a matter of assembling documentation from both parties and making sure that lease agreements are reviewed, making sure other documents like pictures or notices or requests for repairs make sure those things are documented too, because actually I didn't mention this earlier, but requests for repairs, definitely one of the top complaints that we receive. And that is when the landlord, in the tenant's opinion, is taking too long to make a repair. And so the tenant feels as though they're being treated unfairly. And so they'll call us, and we in turn will go in and investigate. And oftentimes we end up working with the community and business development departments inspectors just to make sure that the repairs are not repairs that could pose a threat or a hazard to any of the tenants in the unit. But definitely requests for repairs are important, but tenants sometimes want to withhold rent to make sure that the landlord is hearing them, because they feel like sometimes their complaints are falling on deaf ears. And so their solution sometimes is, well, I just won't pay my rent because this needs to be fixed, and I feel like I'm not getting the full use of my unit anyway, so I just won't pay, or I'll just pay part of my rent. And that, of course, is not legal. You have to tender your rent every month, despite whatever repair complaints or issues you may be having. And then if you end up going to court and having the issue litigated, of course, a judge or a magistrate can look at that situation and mitigate damages as he or she may see appropriate.
You also mentioned about cultural enrichment.
Yes.
What does that mean?
Okay. With our cultural diversity and inclusion outreach training, that encompasses a number of areas here in the city. One area is more legalistic, I would say, but it also has a cultural outreach component, which is the limited English proficiency program that the city of Winston-Salem has. And I am the limited English proficiency officer, and what that means for our department is that whenever a resident has a complaint about not being able to access city services due to an English barrier, maybe English is this person's second language, then they have a vehicle, they have a way of complaining or bringing it to the city's attention that perhaps the services that are offered by city government are not understandable by this person because maybe they don't understand the English. Maybe they need it translated. It could be translated into Urdu, it could be translated into Chinese, or whatever the Spanish, whatever the language may be. And so it is incumbent upon city government to find a way to make those programs and services understandable in that person's language. Of course, the LEP program is a federal requirement, and it's required of all city or municipal entities, and probably, I'm sure, state entities as well, to make their services available to everyone despite language barriers. And so it's based on the census, the most recent census always. And so with us, the 2010 census is the most recent. And you look at who your majority second language populations would be. And here in Winston-Salem, Forsyth County, that would be the Spanish-speaking population. So when you have that as a majority population that constitutes at least 15% or more, then you have to make sure that your services are readily available in their language. And for those who constitute less than that or fewer than that, then you would go ahead and make sure that you have an interpreter readily available that they can get in touch with. And it could be a statewide interpreting and translating service or whomever, but just to make sure that you have a way to get the information to that person in a format and language that they can understand. So that's one of the more legalistic ways that we do cultural outreach. Another thing is we try to make cultural outreach fun and interesting. So even with city employees, we conduct cultural outreach and relations training to new employees when they come on board. All new employees, of course, have to go through new employee orientation. And so we are a part of the new employee orientation in that we train new employees when it comes to the expectations of the city for conducting him or herself in a way that is non-discriminatory, whether it's against other employees or whether it's against residents of the city. And so we talk about things like stereotypes, we talk about the EEO laws, equal employment opportunity laws, and we talk about things that can be perceived as discrimination. And so just to get everyone on the same page, and it's not only a city expectation, of course, it is a state law and it is a federal law not to discriminate against people based on certain protected classes in employment. And a larger, more generalized way is we coordinate and we develop programs for the general public just to educate people on the protected classes under the Fair Housing Act. And those protected classes touch on areas such as national origin and race and gender and disability and family status and religion and so on. And so a lot of our programming, for instance, like International Village, is something that we do to try to educate the public about the various cultures that we have right here in Winston-Salem. And we also have Tu Comunidad, Your Community, which airs on this station. And with that, of course, it's in Spanish and English. And we discuss services that the city government offers and also services that are available out in the community that may be of benefit to Spanish-speaking residents as well as everyone else. And so we do things like that. And I'm really proud to say that recently we received the National League of Cities Cultural Diversity Award. We came in second place in the nation for a city of our size, which I believe was 100,000 to 499,000.
So
yes.
Your office really does live out the name of it, human relations, in terms of really navigating and working with the human capital that we have in the city, and really navigating issues that may arise, but then also just helping in that whole process. There's also one thing we others in the city hear the term of the Human Relations Commission. Now, what does the Human Relations Commission have to do with your department?
Okay. The Human Relations Commission is an advisory board that is appointed by the City Council to advise the City Council and to advise our department staff on any matters that relate to human relations areas. So really social justice types of things, civil rights types of things, just to advise us on hot button topics that may be going on in the community. So really our commissioners are volunteers, unpaid, and they keep their ear to the ground, so to speak, to see exactly what is going on in the community that we may be able to proactively tackle, as far as having maybe a forum, as far as having a public discussion of some sort, or other things that we may be able to do to be a positive part of whatever may be going on.
And so how do people get onto the Human Relations Commission?
People may apply to the Human Relations Commission through the Office of the Mayor. There are applications available in his office, and also the application is available online.
All right, and so that's open to any citizen in the city of Winston-Salem?
Yes, it's open to anyone who resides within the city limits of Winston-Salem, have to be at least 18 years of age.
Okay, sounds good to me. You mentioned something earlier, one of the things that your office does in terms of some fair housing things, and want to have some conversation about that a little more in depth, and talk a little bit more in detail on that. And when we think about fair housing, what, in your definition, what is fair housing?
Fair housing is actually a concept, but the fair housing laws are actually reality. That's what I like to tell people. Because people hear fair housing, they think all kinds of things. You know, of course, obviously housing that's fair and equal. But it's important to remember that fair housing is not just a nice thing to do, and it's not just a moral or an ethical thing. It is actually a law. And it is a law that started, of course, at the federal level, back with the Civil Rights Act of 1968. But that actually was a derivative of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which of course this year marks the 50th anniversary of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And so with the Civil Rights Act of 1964, it was more a generalized civil rights legislation, whereas in 1968 it got specialized with fair housing, which prohibits discrimination based on race, national origin, color, family status, gender, religion, and disability. There are 7 protected classes. Mm-hmm. And so if you discriminate against anyone in a housing transaction, whether they are attempting to buy, lease, or finance that housing, then you subject yourself to the fair housing laws. Of course, the person or people who violate or who are accused of violating the law must own 4 or more units in order for the fair housing laws to apply. So, in other words, if you are in an exemption category, like they have something called the Mrs. Murphy's Law, which basically is an exemption saying that if you are a person who lives in the unit or whatever you may live in, and you have people living with you in that, like you're renting out some rooms or something, those aren't the kinds of people that the fair housing law is meant to reach. Also, there's an exemption for housing that is for people 55 and older, because notice with the 7 protected classes, age was not one of the protected classes. But, there is an exemption that allows people who have housing for those who are 55 and older to say that families with children are not allowed to reside in that housing, as long as they can show that 80% of the occupants in that housing are 55 years of age or older. So that's an exemption to the fair housing laws. But basically, again, we just investigate those allegations to make sure that there is not reasonable cause to believe that that fair housing discrimination has occurred. I have 2 investigators on my staff who do that. They make the recommendation to me based on the evidence that they accumulate. And of course, we also have subpoena power with the Human Relations Department and Commission, meaning if we have parties who do not cooperate, we can subpoena documents and people to make sure that they cooperate. And so that's in our charter. And so we can really enforce a lot of the leverage that we have to make sure that we're getting a full view of what happened in the allegation.
How does somebody come to the Human Relations Department when they feel as though some part of the fair housing laws that apply to them and their rights have been violated? What do they do?
Okay, sometimes people come to us via telephone. Oftentimes what will happen, Councilmember Montgomery, is if they don't know that they can call the city directly, they'll call HUD, because HUD has a 1-800 number, a national number. And so HUD will then ask them, well, where do you reside? And so our jurisdiction is the city of Winston-Salem. If it's in the county, we cannot investigate. That is automatically covered by HUD, and sometimes HUD will send them to the State Human Relations Commission in Raleigh. But if they're in the city and they call HUD, HUD sends them straight to our department. And they send us, HUD will send us the paperwork or notes from the phone call. There's an electronic system we have called Teapots. And so they will transmit that information to us online through that system. And they'll send the party to us and give the party our contact information. People may also come in. They may walk in and they may feel like they've been discriminated against, but they're not really sure, but they feel strongly about it. And so that's when we would definitely investigate. So we have a form that they have to fill out called a 903 form. It's a HUD form. And they complete that form, and we investigate from there. So we typically need to have something in writing, but if not, then we can assist the citizen with making sure that they get that information on paper. And I just said citizen, but I want to clarify that you don't have to be a citizen to allege a fair housing violation. A lot of people think that if you're just a resident of the United States, then fair housing laws don't cover you, and that is untrue. So whether people are documented or undocumented, whether they're citizens or residents and so forth, they're still covered by fair housing laws nationwide.
All right. There are some things you all have going on right now that's helping to bring and enlighten our community a little more about fair housing. What's happening?
Well, this is National Fair Housing Month. April is the annual National Fair Housing Month as designated by HUD. And so what we do in April every year, we make a real push to conduct fair housing outreach in our community. And so we had a Fair Housing Month kickoff earlier this month at the Winston-Salem Regional Association of Realtors office with Mayor Joines, and he proclaimed April as Fair Housing Month locally. And we have also done other things with cross trainings with agencies. We are preparing for our Fair and Affordable Housing Summit later on this month, and we're doing some localized trainings in certain pockets of the community who have requested to have some fair housing training and outreach in those communities. And so we have a number of things going on, and even on this station on WSTV, we have an awareness, like a little mini movie, I guess you could call it, that's airing right now, just to talk about fair housing discrimination nationwide. So it's just an extra push to educate people about the existence of fair housing laws. And I'm sure some people may have even seen some advertisements in local newspapers about Fair Housing Month as well.
And why is that important? Why should people even care about the fact of the fair housing laws and then pay attention to what's happening right now with the Fair Housing Month? Why is that so important?
Well, it's very important because a lot of people simply don't realize they have rights when it comes to having equal access to housing. In years past, historically speaking, there have been attempts by some to steer certain segments of the community to certain areas of town, for instance, like a long time ago, or actually probably not so long ago, people were encouraged to live on a certain side of town depending on your skin color. So it was called redlining and steering, where you were told, well, you may feel more comfortable living in this area because there are more people like you in this area, or you might not want to live in that area because there are not a lot of people who look like you here. So let me show you something on this side of town. And a lot of people don't realize that sort of thing continues to happen, and it's more subtle now than it used to be. And so people need to have that awareness. And a part of the way that we try to raise awareness too in the professional housing community is we conduct sporadic fair housing testing, where we send out testers to just kind of see what's going on and if we have some areas in our city that we may need to really concentrate on as far as discrimination is concerned.
And I know that since the laws that have been put in place have taken effect, that we've progressed a lot, and not just in this city, but as a nation, and things have shifted. But I do believe that we still do have issues, and that's the reason why we have a Human Relations Commission, and we do these things from Fair Housing Month to raise that awareness, to make sure people are aware again of the rights that they have, and if they feel those rights have been violated, they need to let someone know so that we can begin that process of working through and working to some type of resolution that exists there. And just for a historical perspective, as you already stated, that 1968 was the year in which these changes happened, and many people think about during the 60s, particularly again the Civil Rights Act of 64 and the Voting Rights Act, but don't also understand the fact of what took place in 68 and the implications that are there. Under President Johnson at the time, there were several transformative legislations that were signed that we are still feeling the implications of right now, that just go forward to help enrich the opportunities and make sure that certain rights of individuals are upheld. And good to see that your office plays a very vital role in this city of making sure that many of those rights are upheld and challenging others when those rights are not.
Absolutely, and as you alluded to, of course, in 1968, that is when Dr. King was assassinated, and he was already working on pushing Congress to pass the Fair Housing Act. But when he was assassinated, it was quickly passed. And President Johnson, of course, did do that. And so that is really how the fair housing laws came into play. But it was not something that was just done spur of the moment. This was something that Dr. King had been working on for quite some time and trying to convince the congressmen and women, Congress people at that time to go ahead and pass that, because it was a very important part of the civil rights movement, because of course at that time there were so many things going on, particularly in housing, where people could not even find adequate housing. They couldn't find anything that was decent to live in. And so that is certainly how the Fair Housing Act came into being. And of course here locally we followed suit in Winston-Salem.
Right, and it's good to have, again, that type of supporting community. One thing that my colleagues on council know about me is that housing is one thing in particular that's very dear to me, specifically affordable housing and very much so livable housing. And I believe that everybody has a right to be able to live in a place that is clean, a place that is safe, and not be forced just because of their economic status to live in a place that is less than habitable. And we have places even in this city that still challenge that, but it's again going back and empowering our community to understand the rights that they have, to make sure that they demand a certain level of quality and service in our community. But again, I want to thank you for joining us today and talking a little bit about the Human Relations Department, talking about fair housing. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
I think you've touched on everything. And I thank you for having me here today and for helping us to spread the word about fair housing and to let everyone know it's not just something that is going on in April, but fair housing is always out there. So I strongly encourage people, if they feel like they are discriminated against in a housing transaction of any sort, including fair lending, because that's a part of the Fair Housing Act as well, to call CityLink 311 and let us look into it.
All right. I was just going to ask you, how can people get in contact with you? So if they call 311, they can get in contact with you all in your office.
Yes.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That will conclude this month's East Ward Update. You can see the program in its entirety on the city's website, www.cityofws.org, or on our YouTube channel. Also, continue watching WSTV 13 and see a description of the city's capital needs. Council will be hosting meetings throughout the month to hear your thoughts on a plan to fund them. Again, thanks for watching. I'm Councilmember Derwin Montgomery.